It was a phone call that no parent ever wants to get. That's what his mother put on Facebook about a month ago. I met this young man at the lacrosse fields. You see, if you didn't know, for the last couple years, I have been the announcer for Lexington High School ladies lacrosse. Now, you may be picturing me up in a press box, but that's not really the way it works in the lacrosse field, because lacrosse is the redheaded stepchild of the sports of Lexington High School. And so, whereas you have a beautiful football stadium where the soccer team plays in the off-season, no, the lacrosse field is directly behind that stadium where the football team practices during the year. So we get a practice field, which means there's no press box. No. We set up across the field on a little table between the two teams. And so it was Eric Clamp, he would run the clock, and I would do the sound. And so this is what all had to come together. First, you had to get the mic, and then there was the soundboard, my phone that hooked into the Bluetooth receiver that was hooked to the soundboard, that was connected to these two massive speakers that were on big stands that would shine out onto the other side of the field. And all of this was charged by electricity that came from the field house, which was about 150 yards away. And we had to set that up every time we came out, and then we had to take it all down when the game was over. Now, the setting up part wasn't so bad, but the taking down, after we had sat through the game, and usually it was about 9 o'clock at night, and we hadn't eaten, and we were just ready to go, but then there would be these three young men that would come from out of the stands across the field, and without saying a word, just pick stuff up and start putting it away. No one ever asked them to do this. They just did it. Well, one of these young men was in a horrible accident on May the 25th. He and his girlfriend were riding through Pillion, and she actually was a lacrosse player, and they went through a stop sign and collided with another car. One of the passengers in the other car was killed. She was ejected from the car, and he was partially ejected from that same car. It didn't look good for either of them as they were rushed to Richland. She had a broken back, has a broken back and a broken neck, and he had a shattered leg. His ear was nearly torn off, and he had a brain injury of some sort. And his parents got that call. Can't imagine that kind of fear. I'm sure that was the longest drive that they ever made from Lexington to Columbia that day, wondering how their child would be, if their child would be. Some of you have experienced phone calls like that, maybe not for a child, but a parent, sibling, spouse, friend. And you get those phone calls and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how things are. And the biggest fear of all, that person will no longer be with us. Or that they aren't. Because, let's be honest, pretty much at the heart of all of our fears is death, right? I mean, what are we afraid of? Spiders and snakes. You've got public speaking. Some people are afraid to go out on the water. Some are afraid of storms. Some are afraid of heights. And some of us are afraid of enclosed spaces. But are we really afraid of those things? I mean, like I said, I'm afraid of snakes. But I'm not really afraid of the snake. I'm afraid that I'm going to get bit by the snake and die. We're not afraid of heights. We're afraid of falling from heights. Yeah? Some people are afraid of flying. Are they really? No, they're afraid of not flying. Public speaking, I don't know, fear of dying of humiliation. I don't know, but at the end result of most of our fears is that we will cease to exist, or that someone we love will cease to exist. And we see that fear in the midst of the disciples on that boat. Jesus says, hey, let's go to the other side. And they're like, sweet. So they all load up the boat, and they get on the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Gennesaret, and they head to the other side. Now, something you need to know about this lake is that the weather there apparently is a lot like, South Carolina, because it's hot, it's muggy, there's all these vortices of winds that can just come down, and a storm can show up in a moment's notice. I mean, look, I don't know if you noticed this, but sometimes there is 0% chance of rain, and we will have an awful storm. Well, they didn't have the Weather Channel on their apps on that boat, but they were fishermen. They knew how to read the weather. They also knew the dangers. But this one apparently was pretty bad. Because in the midst of this, these experienced fishermen knew that they were in trouble because the wind was blowing so hard that the water was just swamping the boat. And, well, if a boat gets too swamped, it sinks. And then there's Jesus. What's he doing? He's sleeping. Now, I'm curious, any of you very sound sleepers? Like, your spouse will say, they could let a bomb off next to you and you won't wake up, right? Well, I'm one of those. But if you're throwing water in my face, I'm guessing I'm going to wake up. And so here's Jesus asleep on a cushion, and there's water just coming in the boat. Well, it's splashing all over him, and he's still sleeping through it. He must be the Messiah to be able to do that. And so they come up to him, and they say, Jesus, don't you care that we're dying here? Now, it's funny, because this same story is also in Matthew and Luke. And Mark was first written, but Matthew and Luke, they say, that's a little harsh to speak to Jesus that way. So they say, save us, Lord, for we are perishing. Mark says it plain. Yo, Jesus, don't you care? We're going to die. Wake up, we're dying. And you can hear that fear in their voices because they don't want to die. It's that same kind of fear that grip us, isn't it? That fear of the end. But is it really death that we're afraid of? I don't think so. I think it's the fear of the unknown. Because despite the fact that we have faith, the fact that we believe that after we die that we will be with the Lord in heaven, we don't exactly know what that's like, do we? Anyone here know what that's like? Yeah, me either. Although I did go to 2 funerals recently, and in both they told me what heaven was like. I wanted to go up and ask the preacher how they knew whether or not they had died before, but I didn't. Because that's kind of what you need to do. To be certain of what's going to happen, you kind of have had to been there before. And that's a huge fear for all of us, is that fear of the unknown. Because we don't know what's going to happen. Not only then, but in the future. Because there's a lot of things that scare us that have nothing to do with death. Things like major life changes, a job, moving, getting married, getting divorced. There are things like going in a whole new career direction, or your children are moving out, or you're moving out, or you're having children, or you're not having children. There's all kinds of decisions and changes that scare the bejesus out of us. Why? Because we don't know how it's going to end up, right? It's not always about death. Sometimes our fear is just like we don't know, and that scares us. Jesus wakes up in that boat and says, peace, be still. Now, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people picture Jesus in the mighty wind saying, peace, be still. I picture Jesus being woken up and going, peace, be still. Sort of like when your kid comes to the room in the middle of the night. Just calm down, go back to sleep. Peace, be still. But at once, however it went, the wind stopped blowing, the waves calmed down, and there was peace. And it was wonderful. For a moment. Because you see, there was more to this than just that storm. This was actually the storm before the storm. Because see, they were headed to the other side of the sea. And on the other side of the sea was Gentile land. People that they didn't want to be with and that didn't want them to be with them. It wasn't a safe place for these Jewish disciples to go. They didn't know what to expect. They had never been there before. They knew that they were unwanted. They knew that it was unclean people that they were supposed to be with. And yet, this storm showed them something. It showed them that Jesus was in charge. And that's something that we all need to remember from time to time, isn't it? When the storms of our lives are blowing, when everything seems to be falling apart. That reminds me of someone. You ever heard of Job? Maybe because we just read about Job just a minute ago. Because see, Job, his whole life fell apart. His whole family died. And he lost everything he had. It's like everything was leveled. All his possessions gone. All his family gone. His health, all of a sudden, it was gone too. His life was in the toilet. It was awful. But Job didn't leave his faith, but he did have a few words for God. As I'm sure most of us would at that time, right? As I'm sure the disciples did about Jesus. Don't you care that we're dying? Job was like, hey God, don't you care that I'm here? Listen to what God has to say in return. That's what our first lesson was. He said, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Who are you? You don't know nothing. Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the world? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched that line upon it? Or when the base is sunk, or who laid its cornerstone, when the morning stars sang together, and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea doors when it burst out from the womb, and when I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far you shall come and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stopped." In this passage, God tells Job, don't you know I got this? I created the world and all that's in it. And I know that you're scared of what's to come. I know that life isn't great for you right now. But don't you know I'm stronger than this? Don't you know that I control the wind and the seas? Don't you know that I've got you and I've got this? See, that's the same message God has for all of us in the midst of the storms of our lives. When everything feels like it's crashing down or crashing in on us. God has a message for us. I got this, and I'm in control. It may not always work out the way we wanted it. It may end in death. But here's the thing, even in death, we have the message from God. I'm still in control. I've got this, and I've got you. And that is the most incredible thing. We're going to live through scary things in our lives. Some of us are going to receive phone calls like that mother did. And it's going to scare us to pieces. But God's got this. That family knows this because that son that they were worried wouldn't wake up within days was playing his guitar for them. God was there. God is there with all of us. Day in, day out. In good and bad, in tough times, in easy times, you name it, our God never departs from us and is stronger than anything that we can put against it. There's something a lot of folks say, God will never give you more than you can handle. I'm not sure that's true. But I know this, God will never give you more than God can handle. Amen.